Speaking of which, let's have a look at David Partington, our teammate, and what he has achieved previously.
And it's going to be a few results, of course, getting the Bristol Regional Championship title back in 2019, using Murkrow back then to a very, very great effect. Players' Cup 2, European qualified top 12, so not quite making it through to the global finals, but was certainly giving it a good shot in his region. Lille Regional top 16 in the Sword and Shield era, and a London Open 6-3 record back last year at the World Championships.
I don't like talking about the Players' Cup. I've been very close to global finals in that one before, and I think the definition of a heartbreaker has stopped me from maybe one of the best results I could have got. But anyway, David obviously with some very notable achievements, a regional champion, as you've mentioned, and he is running a team with Farigiraf, a Pokemon that has picked up a little bit recently thanks to its Armor Tail ability. We've seen a lot of Pokemon like King Gambit, like Rillaboom. We've seen Chen Pao, Pokemon that like to rely on these big, hard-hitting priority moves like Grass Tea Glide, Sucker Punch, Extreme Speed on Dragonite, for example, the Armor Tail ability shutting those down, Safety Goggles as well, making it a very nice answer to Amoonguss with that immunity to Spore and to Redirection and that super effective Psychic-type attack.
And rounding out the team, we've got Ogerpon, Fluttermane, Iron Hands, Arcanine, and Roaring Moon. And I do want to draw attention to the item choice on Arcanine. Most of them have been choice band that we've seen, maybe a little bit more citrus recently, but Clear Amulet stopping any sort of Intimidate drops or Icy Wind drops or Bleak Wind Storm drops as well, kind of gives this Arcanine a little bit more of a niche to sort of stand proud in front of a lot of different threats in the format and still be able to, just go for those rock slides in the face of maybe another Arcanine switching in to try to intimidate it, but not being successful here. The other thing I want to point out there, Matt, is that Ice Punch on Iron Hands.
Yeah, something we've seen before within our own team, in fact. Our very own Jamie Boyd has pioneered, maybe going one step further with Terra Ice Punch on Iron Hands. Yeah. But that's a very good cover into Landorus, I think, in particular. Landorus Therian against this team. Intimidating the Iron Hands, intimidating the Ogerpon, intimidating the Roaring Moon. But we see counterplay to that on the Clear Amulet Arcanine and the Ice Punch on Iron Hands. Beyond that, I think this is a pretty standard kind of mixed Tail Room. Tail Room is kind of the unofficial term for it. Teams that have both a Tailwind option and a Trick Room option. I'm partial to teams like that myself. We see the Fake Out and the Follow Me as ways of setting up the Trick Room. We see Tailwind on the Roaring Moon. And we see a mix of kind of fast and kind of mid to slow speed threats, meaning that a very key part of this team is identifying what kind of speed control you want to employ in a certain matchup. And speaking of matchup, let's have a look at what we are up against with Federico Camporesi.
Yeah, as a very, very accomplished player from Team Italy. More recently, aged up from the senior division where he was able to get 3 regional championship titles as well as a finalist in 2 international championships as well. Definitely nothing to scoff at there. Aging up into the Masters, getting a top 16 at the Liverpool Regional Championships last season and getting top 4 in the World Championships in Japan last year.
And was that his first season in Masters?
Looks that way.
That is impressive. I've been in Masters for a number of seasons and I've not even made Day 2 of Worlds. So clearly he's got something going for him. Let's have a look at this matchup now. We see an opposing Tailwind on this Tornadus. This is a team of 6 Pokemon we've seen quite frequently. Tornadus with that Tailwind support helping out big heavy-hitting threats like Urshifu, like Regidrago, Goldengo, and Ogerpon. Rillaboom providing a little bit of support with Fake Outs, with Grassy Terrain, giving that Grassy Glide priority on the Ogerpon. But as we mentioned, Farigiraf gets in the way of that Fake Out on Rillaboom, the Grassy Glide from Rillaboom and Ogerpon, Aquajet from Urshifu as well. So Farigiraf is going to be an interesting Pokemon in terms of how this matchup plays out, because Federico can't necessarily default to his plan A, because if he goes for his plan A of Tornadus and some kind of fast attacker and Trick Room goes up, that's going to be a problem.
It certainly could be, but also, there is the opportunity for David to be matching those Tailwinds. The problem with that is that the Tailwind setter of choice for David is a Dragon type, and if Regidrago has anything to say about it, that Roaring Moon isn't going to be doing too much either. As well, supporting that Roaring Moon is, that Regidrago is that combination that we've seen in Stuttgart this weekend. Golden Go, Regidrago, Ogerpon, Halflame seems to be the offensive core of choice, backed up by some Tailwind and Icy Wind. If Federico is able to get this going and is able to stop the Trick Room that you mentioned, Matt, this could be a really overwhelming amount of damage to be able to deal with.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with this offensive core. It's just overwhelming. If you think of things that want to switch in on Dragon-type attacks, all you've got Steel types or Fairy types. And Steel types don't want to take an Ivy Cudgel from an Ogerpon. Fairy types don't want to take a Make It Rain from Golden Go. So that offensive synergy, like you mentioned, makes it very, very hard to play into this team. And with no natural Dragon resists on David's team, this could be a little bit tricky to work around that Regidrago. So we'll see how Federico can employ that in this matchup.
And the matchup's going to be getting started with a Half-Flame Ogerpon and a Golden Go coming out from Federico's side. Farigiraf and Iron Hands for David. So an immediate threat of Trick Room.
Yeah, the obvious play here is the Fake Out Trick Room. A very common lead, you'll see Iron Hands plus a Trick Room setter, be it Cresselia or Farigiraf, or Dusclops maybe. But that's a free Trick Room, I think, if David wants it. There's not much that Federico can do to stop that, but you do need to be wary of the amount of damage this Golden Go can do. Or there is also the option to maybe trick a Choice Specs onto one of these two Pokemon, probably the Iron Hands. Iron Hands getting rid of its Assault Vest, removes a lot of its bulk, locks it into one move, means it can't really go for Fake Out later in the game. So we'll see if Federico opts for that.
Yeah, as Ogerpon does switch out into the Rillaboom, so aware, I think, Federico is of the fact that that's probably not going to be able to move this turn. Decides instead to have a little bit of damage taken on the Rillaboom, but it is that trick that you mentioned there, Matt, coming out into the Farigiraf, not the Iron Hands. So that Farigiraf is going to have its special attack and its attacks in general boosted up by that Choice Specs, but it's not going to be able to do it next turn because the Choice Specs was tricked onto the Farigiraf before it was acting. That means that Farigiraf is now locked in to Trick Room.
Yeah, so that's an interesting play from Federico because it forces the Farigiraf to switch out, which now with the Rillaboom switch, it opens up something like a Fake Out onto the Iron Hands, maybe repositioning. The flip side of that, though, is you've just given Farigiraf a Choice Specs, so Farigiraf can get back on the field with that Trick Room still active. That's going to be a lot of damage, and it's also damage your Golden Go is no longer doing, because Golden Go doesn't have that Choice Specs anymore. It loses a lot of damage output, but unlike a lot of Golden Go that don't have Choice Specs, it can't Nasty Plot to boost that damage again.
Farigiraf switching out here into the Arcanine, and that's definitely not going to want to take the damage that this Golden Go and Rillaboom can dish out, but it's certainly better than undoing the Trick Room that you've just spent a turn setting up. Wild Charge doing just less than 50% to the Golden Go, so good amount of chip damage, but most crucially not a 2-hit KO, especially not with that grassy terrain recovery. And I think, as we both suspected, Matt, that Arcanine is going straight back to David.
Yeah, interesting from Federico there. Like I said, the Fake Out was on the board if you wanted to stop some damage on his Golden Go. Instead saying, right, you have to switch your Farigiraf. I don't think there's anything on your team that's going to come in on a Wood Hammer and a Make It Rain on the same slot. But the flip side of that now is that's a free switch back in for David, who I think with his newly acquired glasses on his Farigiraf looking very stylish, he's going to like the look of this Choice Spec Psychic.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there was maybe more utility from that Arcanine rather than the Farigiraf, looking at the Pokemon that certainly are out on the field right now, but also that we know that the Half-Flame Ogerpon is in the back too. That Arcanine looks pretty good into all of those Pokemon, and maybe David switching out that Farigiraf this turn could have been to his detriment, maybe a little bit in the longer game here.
It'll be interesting to see, because I think David will be trying to end this game as quickly as possible. Now that he can't reset that Trick Room, now that he's got the Choice Specs, he's just going to want to start to try playing aggressive, get KOs as quickly as possible. And we see there the Golden Go forced to switch out almost because it's at -1 special attack.
Ooh, can't be Psychic into the Rillaboom.
Yeah, That's a nice double up into the Rillaboom. Rillaboom does go down.
And it's going to be, yeah, that's a really nice little double up there. Federico deciding to switch out that Golden Go to reset those stat drops from the Make It Rain previously. Get Ogerpon onto the field, but this is a tough situation, I think, now for both of these trainers, and I think now we're feeling the effects of that Farigiraf and the choice specs that it's now gained from the Golden Go.
Yeah, so Farigiraf now, Urshifu not in a particularly good position here in front of an Iron Hands and a Farigiraf with Trick Room up. Both of these Pokemon threatening to KO it in one hit. But at the same time, Golden Go also wouldn't have been particularly happy with that position because it's also threatened with a KO in this situation, but it also can't protect. Whereas this Urshifu could at least force maybe some mind games with the Detect, forcing a pick a slot to target and maybe trying to get an attack off with the slot that isn't being hit.
Well, we'll have to see which Pokemon is going for their defensive option. Federico protecting that Urshifu and a Wild Charge going into Ogerpon. Looks like David trying to cover the switch in, but Federico holding his ground here. The Ogerpon hanging on with just a sliver. Doesn't mind those choice specs on the Farigiraf and launching an Ivy Cudgel into that Iron Hand. Not picking up the KO, but doing, I think, quite important damage.
Yeah, very important damage on the all damage on Iron Hands is very important because it's so bulky that you can't really take it out in one hit. So it's often a case of getting damage down on it when you can. But that leaves this Farigiraf still very healthy, and Urshifu's in a situation now where it's just used Detect. It can't safely do it again. And it's under threat, as we said, from both of these Pokemon. So maybe David might want to just start swinging, take some KOs here.
It looks that way as the Urshifu switches out. Federico recognizing that it's under a lot more threat, and because this Trick Room is running out very quickly in this situation, it's going to be the Golden Go switching out. Federico trying to preserve that Urshifu so it can launch out its powerful Surging Strikes a little bit later on, or once it's going to be the more speedy Pokemon on the field. Golden Go going down to that double target. Ogerpon didn't necessarily need to protect itself, but I think the way that Federico played that was probably correct, given that the grass is coming away from the battlefield now, and I think that Trick Room is not long from ending as well. I think we'll see that once this Urshifu switches in.
I think we did just see the Trick Room has already ended. So now Urshifu and Ogerpon in a stronger offensive position, but Farigiraf in particular is going to need 2 hits, I think, to KO it at this point. And Ogerpon, having just gone for that Spiky Shield, is again a bit of a target. Even the Iron Hands, I think the Urshifu would have to go for that Water Terastallization, or Ogerpon going for the Fire Terastallization to get enough power to knock the Iron Hands out with just one attack. So both of these Pokemon forcing either a Terastallization or a double up to try and take them out means that the other one is free to fire off a big attack.
I think it's the question of the Terra choices here, especially since the Iron Hands on David's side has the opportunity to go for a Terra Grass. Maybe that's the response we're seeing from Federico going for his own Terra, the Terra Fire on that Ogerpon Half-Flame. I'm wondering, Matt, whether this Ivy Cudgel is going into the Farigiraf and whether that's enough to knock it out in one.
It does go into the Farigiraf and it does knock it out in one hit. We see there the power of that Terra Fire Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon Half-Flame. That +1 attack boost, giving it enough power to KO. And the close combat KOing the Iron Hands. I didn't expect that to KO, but Iron Hands now going down. David down to 1 Pokemon.
This actually makes so much sense from Federico's side. You cover the potential of having a Wellspring Ogerpon in the back there that we've seen now revealed for David, but also you cover whether or not that Iron Hands is going to be going for a Terra Grass in that situation. Close combat, it's kind of not something that we think about too often with the amount of Rain Dance and Terra Water, but close combat is actually more powerful than Surging Strikes, even with the 3 critical hits, and so you kind of cover all bases there from Federico in a really nice way to put a lot of pressure onto both David's Pokemon and guarantee that if you're not knocking out, you're coming close, and if David's switching, you're still putting the pressure on.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's just trying to guarantee those knockouts on both those Pokemon there. Federico positioning himself very nicely to get out of that Trick Room and get in a position where he can take those 2 KOs. David going for the Terastallization here on his Ogerpon. Is it going to be enough? It feels like it might be a little bit too little, a little bit too late, as a lot of damage comes out from that Ivy Cudgel. But we do see that David's Ogerpon is faster than the Urshifu on Federico's side. And so this might be a little bit tricky, because this Ogerpon on Federico's side is not running a particularly powerful Grass-type move. Its most powerful Grass-type move is that Grassy Glide, which doesn't currently have the terrain boost that it likes to get. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not this will be enough to pick up the KO on David's Ogerpon. And again, another game today coming down to how well these Pokemon are trained. And the Glide is enough.
Federico training his Ogerpon very, very well there, picking up the knockout. I think that looked pretty close, actually. I mean, Grassy Glide is a super effective hit in that situation. But with the reduction in base power that Grassy Glide has had in the current generation, it's got to be pretty close to the same power as a Terrafire Ivy Cudgel in that situation.
Yeah, you got to wonder what the damage rolls look like on those, because I think with the close combat as well, I would have guessed that would have been very close, the close combat onto the Iron Hands. I wouldn't have looked at that and said that's a guaranteed knockout. I wouldn't have looked at that Grassy Glide and said that's a guaranteed knockout. And maybe I'm wrong, because obviously the Ogerpon still has that +1 attack boost, so that is going to increase the power of that Grassy Glide. And again, it depends on how much defensive investment the Ogerpon on David's end has, how much training and attack the Ogerpon on Federico's end has. But I think that was a game of fine margins, and often Pokemon is, but in this case it goes in Federico's favor, who did a very, very good job of maneuvering around those dangerous Trick Room turns from David.
I feel like, David was kind of perpetually on the offensive, getting that Trick Room early and maybe having one defensive turn before just launching out attack after attack after attack after attack. But Federico was kind of able to weather that storm, and certainly I think the Golden Go played a big part in that, kind of sponging up 2 Wild Charges and Choice Specs Psychic from the Farigarath. And I think it did come down to that as a combination of both the close combat and the Grassy Glide that we've already mentioned, but also that psychic damage onto the Ogerpon half lane on Federico's side. If that Ogerpon had been trained to be just a little bit less bulky, then that psychic may have even picked up the knockout there. So testament to the way that Federico has prepared for this match and brought very good Pokemon in the situation.
I also wonder if maybe there could have been some slightly different targeting from David in Trick Room, because he was, as you said, holding forwards throughout that whole Trick Room, being aggressive, trying to pick up KOs. But for example, in the turn where Golden Go switched out after that first Make It Rain, without a Choice Specs and -1 special attack, that's not threatening. So it feels like maybe you can call that switching out, try and catch one of the more threatening Pokemon coming in, the Ogerpon or the Urshifu, because Rillaboom obviously is doing a lot of damage with that grassy terrain boosted Wood Hammer, but maybe you could elect to ignore that for just a little bit, take out one of the Pokemon in the back that has Protect, and I think that is a big part of stalling out Trick Room there. If you can take out a Pokemon on that slot that has Protect available to it, you've now, next turn, still got that KO opportunity on the Rillaboom without as many defensive options. So I think maybe... Oops, sorry, go ahead.
That's one of the things, is when you're playing these sort of Trick Room matchups, I think like hindsight's 2020 in those sort of positions. You got to play the turns that you feel are right at the point in time. But let's get into game 2, because I want to see how these trainers are going to react, and it's going to be a completely different lead here from both of these trainers, Halflame Ogerpon and Farigarath, the 2 returning members from Turn 1 Game 1, but Shifu and Roaring Moon making its first appearance.
A very aggressive lead from Federico, leading maybe the 2 biggest damage dealers on his team, certainly right out the gates, certainly the biggest physical damage dealers as well. But David taking a very different approach here, and now this is what I was saying in the team preview, where David has 2 options now for speed control, and it becomes a case of if Federico maybe covers for the wrong one, that could be devastating. If Federico maybe goes after the Roaring Moon and Farigarath just sets up Trick Room, or vice versa, Federico goes after the Farigarath and the Roaring Moon just goes for a Tailwind, then it becomes a little bit dangerous. But This is also, I believe we saw an attack photosynthesis boost on this Roaring Moon, and it looks like we are going to see David go on the offensive here. We see the Terastallization coming out.
One of those things on Roaring Moon where breaking swipe, popularized by our own Jamie Boyd, has been the common set for a lot of trainers, just with the extra utility it brings. But definitely in this situation where you're facing down a grass type and a fighting type, you really do appreciate having the opportunity to go for a Terra Flying acrobatics in this situation. We'll have to see if Federico is able to deal with this right now. Helping Hand, Terra Flying, presumably acrobatics coming out from the Roaring Moon. Spiky Shield on Federico's side, trying to catch that with a Terra Water on the Urshifu, trying to go on the offensive, but not a chance
One
to
shot
go
on the Urshifu
whatsoever. This Urshifu has been knocked straight out there for absolutely free, and David's taking this turn 1 game 2 in such a commanding fashion.
That's an aggressive start as well from David there. I was looking at the options for speed control. David said, I don't need speed control. I'm just going to knock out one of your Pokemon. And Federico going for the Terra Water there to maybe try and get around that acrobatics, get rid of that flying weakness on the Urshifu. But with the Helping Hand and the attack boost from that booster energy and the Terastallization, that acrobatics is enough to pick up the Urshifu. And also, critically, it picks up Federico's Terastallization. So now this Golden Go, for example, doesn't really have any recourse against a knockoff. This Ogerpon can't really defend itself against an acrobatics either.
It's one of the difficult things in this format with Ogerpon's introduction is how do you play around these follow me mind games. A Spiky Shield though, a double Spiky Shield coming off from Federico, but wow,
Doesn't matter.
Playing so aggressively here. The knockoff just cleanly picks up the KO on that Golden Go. It's 2 turns, 2 knockouts, and David has yet to take any damage.
Yeah, absolutely nothing in return from Federico. Trying to make a couple of calls against these aggressive plays, and both times David making the call that ends up being correct. And now Rillaboom is on the field, but Rillaboom with that Farigiraf there cannot go for a Fake Out, cannot go for a Grassy Glide, and it doesn't have Protect, it doesn't have Terastallization to try and bail it out here. So Federico could maybe go for a triple Spiky Shield on Ogerpon if he's feeling lucky, but there's nothing stopping this Rillaboom from going down.
You absolutely have to in this situation, because if you don't get that triple and David just is able to knock out the Half-Flame Ogerpon there, you've got Rillaboom versus the world, and the world is looking pretty threatening right now.
And a quarter of the world is a flying type.
Completely set up. So,
a quarter of said world is flying type, and Rillaboom only has ground and grass type moves.
Yeah, exactly. And acrobatics, no opportunity to go for the triple Spiky Shield there. Acrobatics, an easy knockout into that Half-Flame Ogerpon, and would hammer the first bit of damage going into David's team, but it's not even enough to pick up the KO on this Farigiraf. Psychic in return. No opportunity, critical hit. That's just insult to injury at this point, as David's going to be taking us to a game 3.
Yeah, very commanding game from David there. 4 turns and 4 knockouts from this Roaring Moon. And again, getting rewarded for making a very aggressive play on turn 1. Federico trying to make some defensive calls, but in this kind of situation, once you're on the back foot like that, you have to try and make calls to get yourself back into the game. Because if you make kind of the obvious plays, or if you try and play aggressive and you keep just losing Pokemon, then you're going to end up in a very, very difficult situation. But David, again, getting all those calls correct, and this Roaring Moon now putting in a lot of work. So Federico now, I think, taking a bit of time to recompose and figure out a game plan into this Roaring Moon going into this game 3, because he cannot obviously lead the same way he did last time or play the same way he did last time if he wants to stop this absolute train of a Roaring Moon from driving straight through him.
It seems like the reveal that Fake Out is in the first slot for Federico, and I've got to actually support that, because I'm one of those players as well that puts Fake Out in the slot. We're
gonna have a falling out here. We're gonna have a falling out here. I don't think I can work with you ever again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can we shut down the stream? That's too much.
we're we're gonna keep it on going here, Matt, because I want to see the result of this game. This is so tight to call between these two players, because even though game one was a little bit tighter in as much that, you know, it was a little bit of back and forth. Federico got the early trick going. We saw that David was able to attack for quite a while, but Federico navigated around that. And now game two, David making a pretty risky turn one call there. And looking at it from Federico's perspective for just a moment, I mean, if you think about it, you see a Terra Flying Acrobatics Roaring Moon, and you kind of expect that it's going to want to try to knock out that Ogerpon, right? It's the super effective hit. The Ogerpon did so much work in the last game. It was the one that was able to one-hit knock out the Farigiraf on David's side of the field. So it's like, hey, this is probably the target that David's the most afraid of in this situation. But David making that read that instead, actually, you have to kind of cover for Follow Me. You have to cover for the Ogerpon. Oh, sorry, the Urshifu, in fact. Just going for some big attacks into David, and he absolutely got the better side of that.
I think it's also worth noting in that situation that the Ogerpon can't really go for any risk-free damage into the Roaring Moon because of its Dragon typing before it Terastallizes. Right. Ivy Cudgel and Grassy Glide are both resisted hits. They're not going to do that much damage to it. So if you try and swing with that Ogerpon and you get that wrong, then you're in a lot of trouble. And I think Federico also didn't think maybe that the Helping Hand Terra Flying Acrobatics would take out the Terra Water Urshifu, maybe didn't think that David would even go for the Helping Hand in the first place. And so now I think it's interesting to see how Federico adapts to that, because we saw the 4 Pokemon Federico brought, the Golden Go, the Ogerpon, the Rillaboom, and the Urshifu. The Roaring Moon is faster than all of them. So maybe do you pivot into a Tornadus Tailwind game plan, but then the adaptation from David there is maybe, if there's a Tornadus lead, do you go back to the Trick Room mode? And so, again, with these clashes of very offensive teams, it'll often come down to who is going to make the right lead, who's going to make the right call, and let's see who does in this situation. We do see the Tornadus coming out. Okay, so here's the question. Do you go for a Tailwind or a Trick Room in this scenario if you're David in response? Because you have to do either one of those, worrying about that Choice Specs Golden Go. We saw that the Golden Go was going for a trick in turn 1 onto that Farigiraf to kind of stop it going for its Trick Room shenanigans once it had got into Trick Room. But I think in this situation it's more likely to want to go onto the offensive, just put damage on the board, make sure that Roaring Moon and the Farigiraf are within range of the Pokemon in the back. And I think Tornadus just has the opportunity to maybe go on the offensive straight away with Oblique Wind Storm if you predict or not
that. What?
That's just a knockoff into the Golden Go. Nothing coming out from the Tornadus, no Tailwind. Golden Go just goes down on turn 1 to that knockoff. We do see the Icy Wind coming out from Tornadus though, getting a speed drop on the Roaring Moon, but it's too little too late in this situation. That Golden Go is already down. And I believe we saw the Trick Room coming out from Farigiraf. Those Icy Wind drops now actually working in David's favor.
Wow, okay. What? This is not what I was expecting coming out from this turn. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, I think I liked the idea that Tornadus was going on the offensive a little bit and trying to take advantage of the Golden Go's board position there. I feel like Federico not thinking that the Roaring Moon was quite as fast as it was, because it's going for an attack boost rather than a speed boost. And that Tornadus, also, because it's carrying the Focus Sash, is probably trained to be pretty speedy. But David's
that's what I was thinking as well.
Roaring Moon actually just ends up being faster than that Tornadus and just gets the clean knockout.
Yeah, I think you're correct that Federico probably was banking on the Tornadus being faster. Like you said, a lot of the times in games of VGC, you have to make approximations based on like context clues. And like you said here, the Tornadus is Focus Sash likely to be very fast, and the Roaring Moon got that attack booster energy, so maybe it's not max speed. And in that situation, if you Icy Wind and make it rain there, that's a lot of damage down on both Pokemon, potentially a couple of KOs. But instead, the Golden Go just goes down for free, and now David going on the offensive again under Trick Room now that he's got that slower Roaring Moon, the Ice Wind actually working in his favour here. Knockoff doing almost a whole health bar's worth of damage to this Tornadus, but we get the Terraflying Bleak Windstorm coming out in return, doing reasonable damage, about half to both Pokemon, but another speed drop on Frigoraph. David not going to be complaining about that. This is a rough position now for Federico. Again, that Terastallization being used up means that this Urshifu is running very low on defensive options.
Certainly, and the Icy Wind there from turn 1 that dropped the speed of this Roaring Moon, dropped the speed of the Farigiraf yet further, really goes against Federico in this situation where Farigiraf was able to get the Trick Room up. I wouldn't be surprised now if the Acrobatics was going to be going before the Urshifu was able to act, and because the Terra was committed onto the Tornadus on Federico's side, and I think a reasonable thing to do to get a lot of damage on the board in the situation that you're in. Now the Roaring Moon can just knock out that Urshifu yet again.
Yeah, and I think David going for the more sensible play here of Dazzling Gleam, which would be enough to pick up the Tornadus and also the Acrobatics. We've seen in the last couple of games the fourth Pokemon from Federico likely to be one of those grass types in the back, and so that Acrobatics covers for what's on the field and also covers for a potential switch, which I think is a sensible play here, as we do see the Rillaboom in the back end. And now you got to wonder, is this Rillaboom going to be slower than the Roaring Moon now that it's got that speed drop? Because if it is, it's not looking very good for Federico.
Not at all. And, I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I think a lot of the Rillabooms that we're seeing now in the format are getting speedier and speedier. But the Roaring Moon was already pretty fast, and with the damage that Rillaboom's already taken, I kind of think that it's going to be able to outspeed that Roaring Moon. If it gets a Wood Hammer off to knock out the Roaring Moon in this situation, then it's going to be in a little bit of a better situation. But Federico kind of feeling like the last two Pokemon on David's side were a little bit too much to handle with all of the damage that he'd taken, all those knockouts that David was able to take, and forfeiting the game. It's going to go 2-0 for the UK.